The Amish are often reduced to beards, buggies, and people heroically ignoring Wi-Fi. But behind that image is a culture packed with legal battles, strange compromises, strict social codes, and technology rules that make more sense than they first appear. Here are 32 facts proving Amish history is far weirder, smarter, and more complicated than the tourist version. 1. Amish speech is basically a language time capsule that escaped the museum and kept having children. Most Amish families use Pennsylvania Dutch at home and around the community, English when dealing with outsiders, and older forms of German during worship. That means many Amish grow up switching between languages without acting like they deserve a documentary about it. Pennsylvania Dutch preserves features of older German while carrying centuries of English influence picked up in North America. So, no, it is not broken English, fake German, or Dutch from the Netherlands having an identity crisis. It is its own living language, protected by close communities that resisted assimilation far more successfully than most immigrant groups. Amish life gave the dialect a safe place to survive. The result sounds like rural America, old Europe, and 3 centuries of stubborn continuity holding one very unusual conversation. 2. When Amish people call outsiders English, they are not checking your passport and accusing everyone of secretly being from London. The word is mostly historical shorthand for anyone outside the Amish and Pennsylvania Dutch-speaking world. It dates back to colonial America, when German-speaking communities clearly distinguished themselves from the surrounding English-speaking population. That linguistic border remained long after the British Empire stopped being the neighborhood's main problem. Today, an English person might be from Ohio, Mexico, Canada, or the hardware store 6 minutes away. They could speak Spanish, drive a Japanese truck, and have never seen England except in movies. None of that matters. The term marks cultural separation rather than nationality. It shows that Amish identity was shaped less by modern borders and more by language, religion, local community, and the suspicious presence of people who own cars with heated seats. 3. The Amish do not divide technology into old and holy versus new and probably invented by Satan. Their real question is much more practical. Will this device support our way of life, or slowly dismantle it while promising convenience? That is why some Amish communities permit power tools, gas engines, refrigerators, battery lamps, or workshop machinery while rejecting television, personal computers, and private car ownership. A machine that helps people work together may be acceptable. A device that encourages entertainment, vanity, isolation, or endless contact with outside culture may not survive the review. From the outside, these decisions can look wonderfully inconsistent. Inside the community, they follow a clear social logic. A diesel engine can power useful equipment without becoming the emotional center of the household. A television brings the entire modern circus into the living room. Amish technology policy is less medieval purity and more airport security for cultural survival. 4. Amish worship usually happens every other Sunday, which sounds like religion finally discovered efficient scheduling. The reason, however, is not laziness. Most Amish districts gather in members' homes instead of using permanent church buildings, so services rotate from one household to another. Hosting an entire congregation requires space, preparation, food, benches, and enough organization to make a wedding planner quietly panic. The alternating schedule spreads that responsibility across the district. On the Sundays between services, families may read scripture at home, visit relatives, or attend worship in another nearby district. It is not a spiritual holiday. It is simply a religious rhythm designed around family homes and local community. The services themselves are long, serious, and aggressively uninterested in modern convenience. No instruments, no stage lighting, no motivational screens, and no cafe in the lobby because the lobby is usually a muddy farmyard full of buggies. 5. The Amish may look like someone pressed pause on the 18th century, but that image collapses the moment you examine daily life. Amish communities constantly negotiate with modernity, debating which tools, services, and conveniences can be accepted without weakening the group. They buy manufactured goods, hire outside drivers, use selected machinery, install solar equipment, and sometimes permit tightly controlled telephones or workplace technology. What they oppose is not change itself. They oppose changes that increase individualism, vanity, entertainment, or dependence on outside society. That makes Amish culture far more flexible than the stereotype suggests. They are not historical reenactors who misplace the exit sign. They are actively managing the future according to their own priorities. Every new invention is treated like a suspicious stranger at the door, perhaps useful, possibly dangerous, and absolutely not coming inside until the entire community has discussed what trouble it might cause. 6. One of the funniest Amish compromises is the rule that members may hire a car and driver, but generally may not own or drive the car themselves. At first glance, this looks like a loophole large enough to tow a trailer through. But the Amish concern is not that automobiles contain mechanical evil. The problem is what personal ownership does to social life. A private car makes distant jobs, distant shopping, constant travel, and highly independent lifestyles far too easy. Before long, the church district becomes less important than whatever is 40 miles away and has better parking. Hiring a non-Amish driver for a necessary journey keeps mobility possible but limited. Families can reach hospitals, construction sites, train stations, or wholesale markets without giving every teenager a private escape machine with cup holders. It is controlled access to modern transportation, awkward from the outside but remarkably consistent with the goal of keeping life local. 7. The Amish rarely chase converts, organize flashy missions, or appear at your door asking whether you have accepted the spiritual benefits of suspenders. Yet their population has grown rapidly. The main engine is not recruitment but large families combined with strong retention. Amish children are not baptized as infants, because church membership is meant to be a voluntary adult commitment. Even with the option to leave, a large majority eventually choose baptism and remain within Amish life. Research commonly places average retention around the mid-80s, though it varies between groups. Add families with several children, and the mathematics begins doing impressive work. Outsiders can join, but very few do, because conversion may require learning Pennsylvania Dutch, adopting plain dress, accepting the Ordnung, and rebuilding nearly every part of daily life. Amish expansion is therefore less a marketing campaign and more a culture successfully convincing its own children that staying is worthwhile. 8. Amish shunning is far more serious than a few relatives acting cold at Thanksgiving. It generally applies to baptized members who violate church rules, refuse correction, and will not repent. Baptism matters because it is taken as a voluntary adult promise to God and the community. Once that vow is made, the Ordnung is no longer a collection of friendly suggestions. Excommunication may be followed by Meldung, or shunning, which can include refusing to share meals at the same table, avoiding certain business dealings, or limiting ordinary social closeness. The exact practice varies between affiliations and even families, and it does not always mean complete disappearance from everyone's life. Still, the purpose is deliberately painful. The distance is supposed to encourage repentance and return. There may be no shouting or public humiliation. Instead, the punishment enters meals, visits, work, and family routines until ordinary life itself feels noticeably colder. 9. Contrary to one of the internet's favorite myths, the Amish generally pay taxes. They pay income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, estate taxes, and school taxes, including taxes that support public schools their children usually do not attend. Many Amish families therefore help fund the public system, while also paying for their own private one-room schools, because apparently one education bill was not enough excitement. The major exception involves Social Security and Medicare taxes for qualifying members who receive a religious exemption. Amish teaching emphasizes that the church should support its own elderly, sick, disabled, and struggling members instead of relying on insurance-style government programs. Those who qualify for the exemption also give up the related benefits from that work. So the Amish are not living inside some tax-free pastoral cheat code. They mostly pay the same government bills as everyone else, while insisting that community care remains their own moral responsibility. 10. Amish clothing looks uniform only to people who do not know how to read it. Inside Amish society, plain dress communicates gender, age, marriage, affiliation, local tradition, and obedience to church expectations. Bonnet shape, hat width, coat design, dress color, beard length, and even the method used to fasten a garment can reveal something important. Married men typically wear beards. Women's coverings may change depending on age, worship, or marital status. Different Amish groups prefer different cuts and colors, proving that humanity can create meaningful disagreement even when nearly everyone is wearing dark fabric. The purpose is not to cosplay the past. Plain clothing is meant to reduce vanity, discourage competition, and make submission to community standards visible. Ironically, the outfits outsiders describe as identical can function almost like a detailed social language. Amish clothing is not fashion-free. It is theology, identity, and local regulation stitched into every seam. 11. The Amish beard rule may be one of the most precise facial statements in history. Married Amish men usually grow beards, marking adulthood and marital status. Mustaches, however, are traditionally removed, creating the unmistakable beard without mustache appearance that outsiders instantly notice. The reason is not that upper lip hair was declared spiritually suspicious in a forgotten verse. In Europe, mustaches became strongly associated with soldiers, officers, and military style. Because the Amish follow a tradition of Christian non-violence and reject military participation, they avoided a feature connected with martial pride. The result is a face communicating several messages at once: married, adult, Amish, and definitely not preparing to lead a cavalry charge. Like much of Amish appearance, the rule combines biblical interpretation, historical memory, and group identity. To outsiders, it looks wonderfully specific. Within the community, it is another visible way of refusing to imitate the surrounding world. 12. The famous faceless Amish doll looks like a toy factory forgot the final step, but its blank expression carries a religious message. The traditional explanation connects the missing face with humility, equality, and resistance to vanity. A doll does not need painted beauty, dramatic eyelashes, or a tiny expression suggesting it has already judged your furniture. By leaving the face empty, the toy avoids placing too much importance on appearance and reinforces the idea that people stand equally before God. The tradition is not universal, and historians note that Amish children have also played with dolls that had faces. Still, the faceless version became the image outsiders remember because it fits the broader Amish emphasis on plainness so perfectly. It turns an ordinary child's toy into a quiet lesson about ego. Only the Amish could remove 3 painted dots and somehow produce an entire sermon made of cloth and stuffing. 13. Amish clothing may appear simple, but the fasteners alone can become a miniature theological battlefield. Some Amish groups historically avoided buttons on particular garments because buttons were associated with military uniforms, decorative fashion, or unnecessary display. Instead, clothing might use hooks and eyes, straight pins, snaps, or other closures considered less flashy. To an outsider, this can sound like civilization launched a moral emergency over a tiny disc with 4 holes. Within Amish culture, however, dress is a daily form of discipline. Plain clothing is meant to discourage vanity, status competition, and obsession with changing styles, so even small details can carry symbolic weight. The rules also vary widely. One district may allow buttons on shirts but reject them on coats, while another sees no problem at all. Apparently, even in a culture famous for simplicity, clothing policy can still become complicated enough to make a fashion committee feel underqualified. 14. Amish resistance to social security is not simply anti-government frustration wearing a straw hat. It grows from the belief that Christians should care directly for members of their own church during sickness, disability, old age, or financial hardship. Depending on government insurance would weaken that responsibility and replace mutual aid with an outside institution. United States law eventually allowed members of qualifying religious communities to request exemption using Form 4029. But the exemption is not a magical arrangement where someone stops paying and still collects later. Those who receive it waive Social Security and Medicare benefits connected to the exempted work. In other words, the decision comes with consequences. This system only functions because Amish mutual aid is not motivational language printed on a brochure. Families and congregations are genuinely expected to provide money, labor, care, housing, and support when someone struggles. Their position is simple. We reject the safety net because we are supposed to become one. 15. Amish discipline can be emotionally brutal without ever becoming loud. There is usually no public screaming match, furious press conference, or dramatic furniture being thrown across a room. Correction happens through ministers, family relationships, confession, community pressure, and the possibility that people you depend on will become carefully distant. Minor violations may lead to warnings or demands for acknowledgement. Persistent disobedience by a baptized member can result in excommunication and shunning. Because Amish life is built around shared worship, work, meals, business, transportation, and family networks, that distance reaches much deeper than outsiders often imagine. The punishment does not merely damage reputation. It alters the structure of daily existence. Familiar conversations become shorter. Shared tables become complicated. Ordinary warmth may disappear. In a highly individualistic society, social rejection is painful. In an Amish district where belonging shapes nearly everything, it can feel like the entire world quietly moved several feet away. 16. The Amish do not assume every new machine is sinful. They assume every new machine is capable of rearranging society while pretending it merely saves 15 minutes. Technology is treated as socially powerful rather than morally neutral. A device may be approved in one setting, modified to reduce its influence, or rejected entirely depending on what it does to family life, humility, work, dependence, and separation from outside culture. A tool that improves farming or supports a community business might be acceptable. A device that delivers constant entertainment, personal freedom, advertising, or endless communication may be considered far more dangerous. This is why Amish rules often look inconsistent to outsiders. Electricity from one source may be rejected while battery power is accepted. A phone may be permitted in a workshop but forbidden inside the home. The Amish are not enemies of progress. They simply refuse to worship convenience, which now looks more rebellious than owning any machine. 17. Amish farms became symbols of wholesome American simplicity without the Amish ever launching the world's quietest advertising campaign. They were not planning a brand strategy beside the barn. They were farming, raising families, and trying to avoid the self-promotion that branding requires. Outsiders did the rest. Horse-drawn equipment, plain clothing, tidy fields, handmade goods, and visible family labor became symbols of honesty and a supposedly calmer past. By the second half of the 20th century, the image had serious commercial value. Tourism expanded, furniture companies borrowed Amish identity, and businesses began using the word Amish as a shortcut for authentic, durable, natural, and probably made by someone who has never checked social media during lunch. The irony is magnificent. A community organized around humility and resistance to worldly attention became one of America's strongest lifestyle brands. They tried to avoid performing for modern society. Modern society built gift shops around them anyway. 18. The Amish movement began with a religious split over discipline, humility, and how seriously Christians should separate themselves from the world. In 1693, Swiss Anabaptist leader Jacob Ammon argued for stricter church discipline, stronger shunning, plain appearance, and clearer separation from surrounding society. His followers eventually became known as the Amish, while related Anabaptist groups continued along different Mennonite paths. It was an extremely appropriate origin for a tradition later famous for debating beards, buttons, buggies, and electricity with enormous spiritual intensity. The movement remained small and faced persecution in Europe, hardly looking destined to become one of the most recognizable religious cultures on Earth. Migration to North America changed everything. The Amish survived, expanded, and eventually became icons of old-fashioned America. That is the historical joke. A group founded partly to resist worldly display became globally famous as the ultimate symbol of visible simplicity. 19. Rumspringa is often portrayed as Amish spring break, where every teenager receives car keys, fashionable clothes, and permission to personally investigate every bad decision invented since electricity. Reality is usually much less spectacular. The term means running around, and the period often begins around age 16. Young people spend more time with peers, attend youth gatherings, begin courting, and gradually decide whether they will join the church. Some experiment with alcohol, cars, clothing, music, or other parts of outside culture. A smaller number go far enough to provide endless material for reality television. For many, however, Rumspringa is mainly a social stage between childhood and baptism. Because Amish membership requires adult baptism, young people are expected to make a voluntary choice. The period is therefore not simply a rebellion vacation. It is a prolonged, community-based decision about faith, marriage, identity, and whether ordinary life will continue inside or outside the Amish world. 20. In many Amish districts, ministers are selected partly by lot, creating what may be the most stressful religious raffle in America. Eligible men are nominated by members of the congregation. During the selection process, hymn books may be placed before the nominees, with a slip hidden inside one book. The man who receives it is understood to have been chosen through God's will rather than personal campaigning. This prevents church leadership from becoming a popularity contest full of speeches, alliances, and suspiciously strategic casserole donations. It also means a quiet farmer can arrive at worship expecting an ordinary Sunday and leave responsible for preaching, discipline, counseling, and spiritual authority. Amish ministers are generally unpaid and often serve for life. Nobody announces a candidacy or unveils a leadership platform. The process is designed to discourage ambition, which it accomplishes brilliantly by making the winner look like someone who just received extremely serious additional homework. 21. Decades before social media convinced everyone that breakfast required an audience, Amish communities had the budget. Founded in Ohio in 1890, this weekly newspaper connected distant Amish and Mennonite settlements through local correspondents known as scribes. They submitted reports about births, deaths, weddings, illnesses, church visits, harvests, accidents, weather, travel, and whichever relatives had arrived on Tuesday. To modern readers, the updates can sound gloriously ordinary. But when families are scattered across several states and avoid digital communication, ordinary information becomes the network holding everyone together. The budget functioned like an analog social feed where the algorithm was the postal service and nobody was rewarded for making strangers furious. It helped plain communities maintain relationships across enormous distances without inviting the internet into every home. While the modern world invented endless scrolling, the Amish already had a news feed printed on paper, delivered weekly, and filled almost entirely with people they actually knew. 22. Amish reluctance toward photography is tied to much more than disliking cameras. Many interpret posed portraits as dangerously close to creating graven images, but humility is equally important. A photograph isolates one person, preserves their appearance, and can turn them into an object of attention or admiration. In a culture determined to keep individual pride under tight supervision, deliberately arranging flattering pictures of yourself may feel spiritually questionable. Practices vary, and many Amish do not object to unposed images, photographs of farms, or pictures where faces are not clearly visible. The major discomfort is often with stopping, posing, and performing for the camera. Outsiders may consider that excessively strict, especially in a world where people photograph themselves beside coffee. From the Amish perspective, the concern is perfectly logical. A camera does not merely record reality. It can encourage vanity, display, and self-importance. Basically, it is a pocket-sized machine for making the individual the main character. 23. The Amish movement nearly disappeared from Europe but expanded dramatically in North America, producing one of history's most successful religious relocations. The community emerged from late 17th century Anabaptist divisions in Switzerland and surrounding regions, where persecution, military pressure, and political instability made survival difficult. Migration to Pennsylvania offered greater religious tolerance, available farmland, and enough distance for communities to develop without constant interference. Over time, the Old Order Amish largely vanished from their European homeland, while settlements multiplied across the United States and Canada. Today, growth comes through large families, high retention, and the frequent creation of new church districts as older settlements become crowded. The story is therefore not simply about people refusing modern technology. It is about migration, land, religious freedom, and a social structure remarkably good at reproducing itself. Europe planted the movement. North America accidentally provided ideal greenhouse conditions, and the Amish grew far beyond anything their persecuted founders could have imagined. 24. The classic Amish school can place children from 1st through 8th grade in 1 or 2 rooms under a single teacher, which sounds like educational chaos until you see the system's rhythm. The teacher is often a young Amish woman who completed 8th grade herself and received practical training rather than a collection of advanced university credentials. A local school board, usually made up of Amish fathers, hires the teacher, manages the building, controls expenses, and keeps lessons aligned with community values. Older students work independently while the teacher rotates between age groups. Younger children also learn by watching older ones, and routine does much of the heavy lifting. The curriculum emphasizes reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, and practical responsibility rather than preparing every child to become a corporate consultant with an inspirational profile page. It is modest, local, and designed for the life students are expected to live, not the world mainstream education expects them to chase. 25. Amish communities became major tourist attractions through the extraordinary strategy of not trying to attract anyone. Outsiders were fascinated by horse-drawn buggies, plain clothing, large families, farm landscapes, and a lifestyle that appeared untouched by the exhausting speed of modern society. That fascination created guidebooks, bus tours, souvenir shops, staged villages, restaurants, and entire regions marketed as Amish country. Millions of visitors now travel through Amish areas, searching for handmade furniture, homemade food, scenic calm, and proof that somebody on Earth still survives without receiving 12 notifications during breakfast. Many Amish people have mixed feelings about the attention. Some benefit economically from tourism, while others dislike being photographed, stared at, or treated like exhibits in a living museum. The irony could not be stronger. A culture built on modesty and separation became famous because outsiders refused to stop looking at it. America saw restraint and immediately turned it into a weekend destination. 26. The horse and buggy is not merely traditional Amish transportation. It is community planning with hooves. A horse limits speed, distance, and convenience, which helps keep jobs, worship, shopping, friendships, and marriage networks close to home. A privately owned car would allow members to work far away, travel constantly, join distant social circles, and build lives increasingly detached from their church district. The buggy keeps the geographic world smaller and the community's pull stronger. Outsiders often assume the Amish use horses because they enjoy maintaining a 19th century atmosphere for passing tourists. In reality, the vehicle performs a social function. It limits how quickly individual choices can scatter families across large areas. Of course, buggies also create safety problems on modern roads and require difficult compromises with traffic law. Still, as a machine for resisting social fragmentation, the horse-drawn carriage has been impressively effective. It is basically a speed limiter attached to an entire culture. 27. The Ordnung is the invisible operating system controlling Amish daily life. Usually unwritten, it is taught through example, correction, custom, and decisions made by each church district. It governs clothing, hairstyles, buggy design, courtship, recreation, occupations, telephones, electricity, machinery, and dozens of tiny choices outsiders would never imagine required religious supervision. The Ordnung translates broad beliefs such as humility, obedience, separation, and community into practical rules. Because each district develops its own version, one Amish group may permit something another considers dangerously worldly. There is no universal handbook available in a gift shop with a convenient index titled Approved Power Tools. The rules live within the congregation and may change slowly through collective practice. That flexibility helps explain how Amish life survives without becoming identical everywhere. The Ordnung is not simply a list of restrictions. It is a cultural immune system, constantly deciding what can enter the community without changing the entire body. 28. Most Amish districts do not own conventional church buildings. Instead, worship rotates between family homes, barns, basements, or large workshops every other Sunday. This is not because nobody learned how to build a chapel. Amish communities are famously capable of constructing buildings. The arrangement reflects the belief that church means the gathered people, not a special structure with expensive windows and an argument about parking. Hosting rotates through the district, spreading responsibility and keeping congregations small enough for personal accountability. Benches may be transported from house to house in a dedicated wagon, transforming somebody's home into a worship space for the day. The system also prevents religion from becoming a performance delivered by professionals to anonymous spectators. When worship happens in your neighbor's home, surrounded by people who know your family, business, and behavior, disappearing quietly into the back row becomes much harder. Amish church life is local, intimate, and almost aggressively impossible to consume passively. 29. The Amish struggle over high school produced one of the most important religious freedom rulings in United States history. Amish parents believed that compulsory education beyond 8th grade exposed teenagers to competitive, individualistic values that conflicted with farming, family labor, humility, and church life. State officials, understandably, disliked the idea that families could simply reject attendance laws. The conflict reached the Supreme Court in Wisconsin versus Yoder. In 1972, the court ruled that Wisconsin could not force Amish children to attend formal high school when doing so seriously burdened their religious practice. The decision gave Amish families a protected exception from compulsory education beyond 8th grade, though later legal scholars have debated its reach and the rights of the children involved. Still, the outcome was remarkable. A small community known for avoiding national politics ended up changing constitutional law because it refused to let the state decide that every 14-year-old required several more years of fluorescent lighting. 30. Pennsylvania Dutch may be one of America's most efficiently confusing names. It causes people to imagine wooden shoes, canals, and immigrants arriving from the Netherlands when the language is mainly rooted in German dialects. The word Dutch developed from older English usage and the community's own word Deutsch, meaning German. Amish settlers inherited this Pennsylvania German language culture, which evolved over centuries through contact with English and life in North America. It is not literal Dutch, badly spoken English, or modern German delivered with farm equipment in the background. It is a distinct dialect with its own vocabulary, pronunciation, and history. The name survived because historical labels often remain long after their original logic stops helping anyone. So every generation gets to rediscover the same surprise. Pennsylvania Dutch is German. Language created the confusion. Immigration preserved it, and American history refused to correct the label because apparently clarity would have been too easy. 31. Amish buggies have produced surprisingly intense legal battles over one aggressively ordinary object: the fluorescent orange slow-moving vehicle triangle. Highway officials view the symbol as basic safety equipment that helps motorists see buggies before discovering them at full speed. Some conservative Amish groups, particularly Schwarzentreuber communities, have rejected the triangle because its bright color appears too flashy and conflicts with their standards of plainness. That disagreement has led to court cases, fines, reflective tape negotiations, lantern requirements, arrests, and even jail sentences. On paper, the conflict looks like government lawyers declaring war over a triangle. For the Amish, however, it raises a serious question about religious authority. Can the state force a community to display a symbol its church considers worldly? Safety officials see visibility. Amish leaders see obedience and separation. Few constitutional disputes have looked so visually ridiculous while involving such genuine concerns about religious freedom, public roads, and avoiding collisions with a black buggy after sunset. Now be honest, which Amish rule sounds completely ridiculous? And which one secretly makes more sense than how the rest of us live? Argue your case in the comments, and name the biggest Amish fact we somehow missed. The best answers may expose an entire second video. Like this one if history surprised you, and subscribe before modern life invents another convenience nobody asked for.